r/NoSleep. Posted by u/nomas39. You know those lists of rules everybody blabbered about? I'm the guy who writes them. Rule number 1, guns don't do jack. All the others vary, but this is always the number 1 rule at every park in the country. Personally, I would have added precisely 4 extra letters to it, but upper brass insists we need to uphold at least some modicum of professional decorum. Still, there are no words to describe just how frustrated it makes me every single time I see some jagoff standing there gormlessly unloading his magazine into some unfathomable nightmare creature who obviously isn't going to feel a thing. Once I even saw someone run empty and then try to reload, instead of just, I don't know, running away. I was almost glad to see him get exsanguinated. Many folks have attempted to get creative with it. You name it, they've tried it. Silver bullets, 50 caliber high explosive incendiary ammunition, shotgun slugs cased in gold carved out from the Ark of the Covenant and pumped full of aglaophotis and blessed by the Pope himself. And nothing. Nada. Zilch. As far as I know, throughout the entire history of the NPS, not a single bullet we fired has even lightly tickled any of God's half-finished rejects that stalk the wilderness. I guess we just have trouble coping with the fact that our generation's favorite hammer doesn't work on this particular nail. In all fairness, though, there's a psychological benefit to holding a gun, even knowing this foremost rule. It's a lot more bearable to weave through trees in the pitch-black wood miles from civilization when you have old Remington's gift to humanity gripped in your shaking hands. Venturing out with just your bare fists feels like you may as well give up, drop true, bend over, and hope the thing with 40,000 eyes is feeling romantic. I have to admit, even I keep my trusty old 1911 on my hip, even knowing it'd be absolutely useless for anything but putting around through my own brainstem in case I get cornered by any of the things you really don't want capturing you alive. Rule 2, handheld UV lights are required when bushwhacking after midnight so fluorescent spider silk may be seen and avoided. If caught by a strand, or if you feel the earth beginning to part beneath you, throw down a circle of salt, recite the Gayatri mantra, and clap exactly thrice. I'm sure you've wondered how we even come up with the really elaborate and specific rules like this one. The answer's simple, a little bit of occult research, and a hell of a lot of deadly trial and error. Sure, sometimes we get lucky and somebody else does our homework for us. For example, up at Isle Royale, an Ojibwe elder was kind enough to provide us with a few rules that help greatly when dealing with, well, you know what. Sorry, but never referring to them by name was one of the rules. In general, though, if you see a rule emphasizing that you have to clap exactly thrice, you can bet it's because some poor bastard tried clapping 2 times or 4 times and ended up paying the ultimate price for it. In this case, it was Anne-Marie, or Crazy Anne. I worked by her side for 20 years, at least. She was a hell of a woman, the kind who made everyone hush into a terrified silence whenever she walked into a room. Still, even she wasn't as scary as that spider thing that kept her alive for a week in his web while he extra-orally digested her. He was a right bastard, and for a while I worried we'd have to write off Shenandoah as a lost cause. But since this rule was put into place, the evil cunt has been more or less left to starve. I consider it my magnum opus. We only pulled it off because of you, Anne, you crazy diamond. Once you've conquered hell, save a spot for me beside your throne, okay? Rule 3, if approached by a man with the head of a deer, offer to make him tea. He likes it strong with milk and 2 sugars. Sit with him as he drinks, and respond to him with absolute politeness and good manners at all times. Never ask him his name. You'll be pleased to know that not every strange thing that lurks in these parks is the sort that yearns to tear your intestines out through your asshole while you cry for mommy. Just like real wild animals, a vast majority of them just want us humans to leave them alone. And a few even like us. We've got a swell arrangement worked out with this peculiar deerman who manifests in front of rangers on graveyard shift every once in a while. That 10-foot-tall son of a bitch has got the body of a man but the head of a stag with a rack any hunter would drool over, the digitigrade legs of a wolf, and he wears these flowing robes which look to be made of the night sky, glimmering stars and all. He talks all cryptic and posh, but all he asks us for is some tea time. In return, he opens the third eye on his forehead and glimpses into the future, giving us a few hints as to what sort of trouble might be brewing in the next few weeks. From our encounters, he seems like a nice enough fellow. We only tell you not to ask his name because it's beyond pronunciation and will just leave your ears bleeding. You know how it is. Rule number 4, if you hear the wailing of an infant in the woods steadily drawing closer to the park office, open the red lockbox with code 0681. There is a living fetus inside on a bed of satin, Pierce its heart with one of the provided golden pin needles until the noises cease. Another complicated mess of a rule we had to bring in a goetic demonologist to help cook up. I know what you're thinking. Yeah, sure, if we knew more about these things, we could probably pare these rules down some more, come up with something simpler, easier. But the point is that the rules we have now have weathered the test of time and have been proven to keep us safe consistently. Once we've achieved that consistency, a rule pretty much never changes, since any propositions to study alternatives are always shut down by the question of what happens if your hypothesis doesn't work? Oh yeah, by the way. You recall how I mentioned there are certain entities out here you really don't want to get taken alive by? This is definitely one of those. Cutting up that fetus is never very pleasant, but trust me, it's worth the trouble. But if you want to trailblaze and stake your life testing out some theory you cooked up, be my guest. Rule number 5, when staying at the old barracks, always cover every mirror in a room before turning out the lights, and never remove a break. Wait. Slow down a second. I had not even made it through 5 rules before the rookie sitting across from me at the cabin rudely interrupted. He was a young man who'd look more at home in Hollywood or Los Angeles than out here in the woods, his immaculately groomed jet black hair slicked to the side like all the posh celebs are doing it. I didn't have a very good first impression of him, but hell, I always hated when I had to babysit a newbie through a night. Patience was never my strong suit. Can I ask why these are all so infuriatingly vague? He continued. Like, what do I do if I forgot to cover a mirror? What happens if I don't clap 3 times or whatever? Because there's 15 rules even just here in Shenandoah. That might not sound like a lot, but when you're fighting fair your life against something with more mouths than you have teeth, it's a hell of a lot to remember. Got to keep details sparse, you see. Make sure to drill in the important bits. And it wouldn't help you none to know what happens if you break a rule, it'd only scare you, I explained. Now shut your yapper while I finish reminding you of them all. He groaned. I've already heard them far too many times. At least 1,000 today. I stared daggers through him. There's no such thing as too many in this case, boy. People died to write these rules, and they'll save your life. With all due respect, how, exactly, are these supposed to protect me? Like, how is clapping and throwing salt around supposed to ward off anything? It's complete nonsense. We got a lot of these types of guys, the rational skeptics who don't believe in your silly rules. It's either that or the fools with more muscle than brains who think they can kill a creature who can make your heart pop with a single thought. Usually, they get filtered out and fired quick. Usually. I made a mental note to beat the ass of whoever decided that this smarmy, cocksure rookie was ready for the graveyard shift. But it was too late to send him home. He wouldn't make it out of the park alive, if he tried to traipse off through the woods at this hour. It doesn't have to make sense. These things don't work by our logic. But I knew I couldn't convince these types with words alone, so I stood. Come here, boy. Let me show you something. I led him to the huge window pane on the cabin's wall, overlooking the forest down below, and checked my watch, only 20 minutes till the show started. It was a pain convincing him to shut up and wait, but that big mouth of his snapped closed the instant he realized something was emerging from the bushes down there. It was a raccoon, not an unusual sight out here, if not for the fact that it was walking upright. And not the clumsy waddling on hind legs you expect from animals, but it seemed to stroll bipedally with all the grace of a man, as if its body had been unnaturally twisted and deformed to befit a style of movement that was never meant for it. It moved with purpose, crab walking across a mossy field with its upper body rigid as a statue's would be, one arm pointing towards the sky and the other to the ground below. It plodded along its set route for a minute before disappearing back into the shrubbery without ceremony. He was baffled, slack-jawed. What the hell was that? Exactly what it looked like, I told him. If you're looking for a logical explanation, there ain't any. Some places on Earth, they aren't run by our logic. They've got a different basis for their rules entirely. And what's that? Symbolism, I replied, as if it were obvious. In our world, everything's got to follow the laws of cause and effect. For what you've seen to have happened, 2 raccoons must have fucked at some point to birth the one we saw. Then somebody, probably me, would have had to surgically or genetically mutilate it in ways beyond current medical science, tame and train the wretched thing, and set it up to perform this exact routine at this exact time. And all for what? To mildly confuse a rookie ranger? Explaining it would require so much contrivance, so much pulling assumptions out your ass, that it would laugh in the face of Occam's razor. For our logic, it is unexplainable. Impossible. But symbolically, it made perfect sense. That creature don't need a backstory or a cause, It probably just came into existence a few minutes ago, and will pop out of existence once it's sent its message. Its gesture was the hermetic mantra as above, so below, reminding us that everything that happens on the surface world is mirrored in the underworld. It happens every morning at 1:33 a.m. because that's the exact time the Witch of Woodbridge killed herself to become the intermediary between the two here in Shenandoah. And it's a raccoon because... I paused. Well, actually, I haven't really figured that part out yet. My words failed to comfort him. In fact, the more I spoke, the more horrified he seemed, eyes widening in confusion and horror as if I'd just sat down and told him that the voices in my head command me to lick the dandruff off of camels. Oh my God. You're crazy. You're actually insane. I sighed and rolled my eyes. Tell you what. Think of, for an example you'd be familiar with, a voodoo doll. You use a strand of their hair or a toenail or something so that the doll comes to symbolize their physical vessel. By hurting the doll, you're symbolically hurting their actual body, so the damage happens to both. That's how the supernatural works. He blinked. Voodoo dolls work? In places like this, they do. I raised a brow. Does that surprise you? Suddenly, he stood and threw up his hands, as if realizing he'd been made the victim of some sick prank. You know what? Screw this. I don't know if this is some kind of hazing thing or what, but I feel like continuing this line of conversation would just leave me as batty as you are. My heart lurched with terror as he stomped to the front door and began undoing the numerous slide locks and deadbolts. Wait. Hell are you thinking, boy? He'd only barely opened the door a crack before I'd wrapped him in a chokehold, but it had been enough. He let out a startled yelp as I started violently pulling him across the cabin, practically clobbering him just to keep him from wrestling out of my grip. I was no spring chicken, and the younger man probably could have bested me, but I had the element of surprise on my side, plus a blow to the head that had left him drowsy. I tossed him headlong through a hatch, down into a crawlspace under the cabin where sage burners and dried tobacco and protective talismans were waiting. I slammed the hatch shut behind him, restraining the squirming rookie with my weight and clapping a hand over his mouth to silence his protests. His face was twisted by confusion and rage, and he was just about to throw me off of him, but then he froze. Eyes widening, as we both heard the unmistakable sound of something walking in through the ajar cabin door. We'd made it into the crawlspace just in the nick of time. There was the heavy click-clack of hooves against the wood floor above us, interspersed with quieter thuds. It took him a moment, but I could tell when he'd figured it out. With one pair of legs, the creature walked with normal hooves. With the other, it walked on the knuckles of human hands. And as it stalked the house, knocking over plates and bookshelves, it growled and hissed and groaned not out of one mouth, but three, one sounding high and avian, one low and reptilian, and another letting out the soft bleating of a sheep, all in unison like some unholy choir. Just when it seemed like it couldn't get any worse, a fourth maw must have opened up, for a new sound filled the room. Daddy? Came a little boy's voice, desperate and whimpered, sniffling in a way that made me feel sorry for it even despite knowing better. Why did you leave me out in the woods, Daddy? It was so dark. And I was so scared. Please, Daddy. I thought you loved me. Where are you? The child's voice devolved slowly but pitiful, begging to outright sobbing and inconsolable weeping, downright screaming itself hoarse as the clock neared 2 and the creature's searching grew frantic. But the very instant the clock struck 2 o'clock, all the sounds ceased, all at once. We waited there for a moment, in that deafening silence. Until I smacked the rookie across the back of the head. Rule 11, you smug prick. You never open the door at this hour of the night. That thing takes it as an invitation. My voice made it obvious I was desperately holding back my simmering fury. I've beaten folks half to death before, and I'm not afraid to do it again. If you want to get yourself killed tonight, have at it. But I am not letting you take me down with you. Once the nightmare had left, his brain had an opportunity to register what had just happened. Which quickly escalated into a full-bore panic attack. Fuck this, man. What in the hell was that? Oh God, oh God, oh God, I can't take this, man. No, 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 I'm not cut out for this. I need to go home. I can't. I watched nervously as he jumped up and started frantically pacing the cabin. He was acting erratically, sloppily. This couldn't end well. Snap out of it, boy. No sense in braving the woods this late at night. You won't be able to see more than a foot in front of your face. Just wait here until sun. He swung at me when I tried to restrain him again, almost breaking my nose. No, man. I can't take an entire night of this. I need to go. Jesus, let me go, you crazy bastard. I didn't want to admit it, but this one was looking like a lost cause. There was no way I'd be able to overpower him again once he inevitably did something else stupid. Call me selfish, but at this point, my only concern was making sure he didn't get me killed. Alright. God, fine. If it's really so important to you, you can go. Your shift's officially over, rookie. But I ain't going out there with you. You'll have to brave it on your own. As long as you follow the rules, you should be able to make it back to your car in one piece. You hear me? The rules. He pouted like a child being lectured by an overbearing father. Yeah, Christ, old man, I get it. I'll follow the damn rules. In my defense, I did furnish him with every single thing he'd need to survive out there. UV flashlights, salt boxes, obsidian talismans, volcanic ash, the dried and shrunken head of a lamb, and more. Not that he appreciated any of it. He was just whining at me to hurry up, ignoring all my attempts to remind him of the rules, like he was in a rush to get out there and die horribly. Eventually, I just gave up, shrugged, and let him hike off into that pitch blackness. To his credit, he made it farther than I'd expected. 20 minutes of silence passed, and I started to wonder if he'd actually pulled it off after all. That was about when the screaming started. I'd heard it too many times before, the distinctive wailing of a man realizing everything he'd done and accomplished in his life had all just been leading up to this moment when a shambling abomination saw fit to deliver him to the afterlife kicking and screaming and missing a few body parts. It didn't surprise me in the slightest, really, but it was still unpleasant to listen to. Judging from what little of it was intelligible, he was crying about something pulling out his eyes. Must have broken Rule 13. Poor, stupid bastard. That one's so easy, you'd almost have to be breaking it on purpose. I remember the first time somebody broke a rule and got themselves killed under my watch. It almost broke me. I blamed it all on myself, then. Sent me into a depression for months. But now, after all these decades, I'm just numb. After all, my only job is to write the rules. If they don't want to follow them, well, it's their funeral.